When I became Minister for Health, it was very clear to me, you looked at every sort of study, tobacco was causing a lot of disease and was killing a lot of people. From respiratory illnesses to heart disease to cancer, tobacco was in all of them. So I was very determined to reduce tobacco use and also prevent its impact as a carcinogen. I met with Tom Power, who was a key official in the Department of Health, who later became Chief Executive Officer of the Office of Tobacco Control. We had legislated for that office in the 2002 Public Health Tobacco Bill, which is a radical bill for its time and governed most of the anti-tobacco measures that came in for the following decade. When we established the Office of Tobacco Control, it commissioned important research into the effects of passive smoking on people, led by, at the time, Dr. Shane Allwright.
But Minister Martin says the move will protect workers who are exposed to passive smoking. A scientific report has shown that they are 30% more likely to suffer from heart disease.
The question for everybody is, are we prepared to allow that continue on into the future, or are we going to do something about it?
I reflected on this over Christmas, and in January 2003, I announced publicly, took it to the Cabinet and announced publicly afterwards that we were going to introduce a workplace smoking ban in hotels and pubs and restaurants and in all workplaces to take effect in January 2004. And that began a year-long debate, and boy was it contentious. But we did a lot of preparatory work. We worked with the trade union movement, Mandate and SIPTU, very progressive unions who backed it because they saw it as in the interest of protecting the health of workers. In other jurisdictions, the tobacco industry would try and get the unions on their side. So it was a big battle really with the tobacco industry, who used surrogates and used different, in our view, used different agencies to advocate against the workplace smoking ban. And we came up against a lot of arguments. The publicans and the Hospitality Alliance was formed, and they claimed thousands of jobs would be lost. And other articles appeared in newspapers saying this was unworkable, it was the nanny state. And to be fair to Tom Power, who had a lot of experience and knowledge of the tobacco industry, we saw a lot of this coming, and we were able to head off quite a significant degree of the arguments. But it was contentious. We were supported very strongly by the Irish Heart Foundation, Norbert Cronin, by Luke Clancy of ASH, Fenton Howell, and then a range of medics, from respiratory physicians to heart disease cardiologists and specialists and so on like that, respiratory specialists, who all argued on radio and television for the introduction of such a ban. And the debate itself, I thought, was very positive. For the very idea that Ireland was having a full-scale public debate on a public health matter like tobacco, I thought was very positive. There was a lot of shakiness around the political world, even though in the Dáil, the political party and spokespeople on all sides were in favour of it. Subsequently, there were attempts made, could you compromise, could you allow half a room, could you have no smoking in half the pub and smoking in the other part of the pub? And we resisted that, essentially. And the only hiccup we had, a significant one at that, was in the German government of the day and the Austrian government of the day invoked a European legislative mechanism asking for our legislation to be reviewed in the context of EU competition law. Did it intervene unfairly with the single market and so on? And that delayed it 3 months. It couldn't stop it, but it did delay it. And I was, at the time, annoyed, and I got a bit of a battering over it. But the bottom line was it gave us a much better weather time in terms of introduction of the ban in March of 2004. And went very well from day one. I think it was quite something that we were the first country in the world to do this as a country. One or two cities had done it, New York and I think San Fran may have at the time. And many people around the world were gobsmacked. What? The Irish are going to introduce smoking ban in pubs, the Irish pubs? And I was remember the front page of the New York Times on March 29, 2004, the Irish banned smoking in the pubs. And it was the pub thing, because the pub thing was seen as part of Irish culture. How could this be true? This isn't possible. I remember the New Zealand health minister ringing me up saying, this paves the way for me to say to the people in New Zealand, if the Irish can do it in their pubs, we can do it too. And I suppose in the early days, I didn't anticipate the international interest. On the day of the ban, it was extraordinary. The television crews from all over the world, US, Japan, everywhere, on the day we announced the ban, and then the day it was live. And that aspect is something that grew, because later on, every year then, when other countries did it, was a landmark. The Scottish First Minister came over here, wanted me to visit pubs to show him how we did it. And the House of Commons, in a free vote, Tony Blair, I remember being at a mobile telephone conference with Enterprise Ireland, because I'd moved on to a different portfolio. And lo and behold, the House of Commons votes in favour of a smoking ban. I gave a punch in the air that night. That was great, that the House of Commons was following the Irish example. And I think it was a slow burn. I mean, we didn't realise either the impact it had on people. We knew it would have a general health impact, but when people, for example, whose children had cystic fibrosis, would come up to you in the street and say, "It's the first time my child can go to a hotel and have a meal, or into a restaurant." Many people had been excluded from hospitality because of asthma or severe respiratory disease or other conditions for which tobacco was bad for them. The Cardiology Society, the European Society of Cardiology, recognised it. They invited me over to their conference, presented me with a gold medal and all that, and the European Respiratory Association. So it captured the imagination of health specialists all over the world, and was cited as an example of how to do things. We were brought to the World Health Assembly, invited me and presented me with a Global Tobacco Leadership Award. I don't say that because of the awards. I said it because it did actually garner huge international attention, and the Embassy Network at the time reported that this was the highest degree of interest in Ireland on any one day right across the globe ever, on a single initiative. And I think that illustrated to us, even at the time, the degree to which it captured the world's attention and set in train a series of other countries following suit, to such an extent that in the modern era, it's now the exception rather than the rule. Very quickly, particularly in terms of, there was studies done in advance, and Dr. Luke Clancy again was involved in this, in terms of the health of bar workers, for example, in terms of nose, ear and throat. And within 12 months, a significant improvement in their conditions and what they were inhaling, in the air quality around their workplace. So very dramatic for bar workers. Also for musicians, because I remember musicians had to stay relatively quiet because they didn't want to annoy the hospitality industry, because they depended on them for their living. But you can think about it, you're singing in a packed environment where everybody's smoking for 3 hours or 1 hour or half hour, 2 hours. Not good for you. And they were liberated really in terms of the smoking ban. Then heart disease started coming down in terms of sudden onset of heart attacks. Ischemic heart attacks went way down, and there were studies done in emergency departments in terms of the numbers of people coming in. Sudden heart attacks reducing, stroke reducing, and so quite dramatic. And the results are there, I think, in terms of the number of people who are dying from heart disease, around 2,000 compared to the numbers dying today, this year. So it's down about 3,000 a year. People, there was about 7,000 back then dying from heart disease, about 4,000 now. Still too many. But also I think the quality of life for people has improved immeasurably. It also, for a younger generation, I think this was key, it denormalized smoking. Smoking was the norm for my generation as kids growing up. I had friends who would buy loose cigarettes. I had friends who would buy the 10-pack. We banned all that in that 2002 Act. But for the kids born today, smoking is not, and for after the smoking ban, was not the norm. And so that meant a whole new generation grew up in Ireland where the smoking levels are much lower than they would have been, say, of my generation, and indeed previous generations to me. Well, the vaping is almost a carbon copy of what happened with tobacco. I mean, in the 50s, and even before that, tobacco advertised and deliberately marketed cigarettes to young people and to kids, because if you hook a 12-year-old and get them addicted to cigarettes, you have them for the vast majority of their lives. And that's what they did, and they had all the films marketed tobacco to young people. In the shops, when you went in, you bought tobacco next to a sweet. And that's why the legislation also allowed for cigarettes to be out of sight, put them under a cupboard, and so on. Now, if you look at vapes, they're being marketed alongside sweets. They're being marketed with flavours, as if you're selling sweets to children. It's shocking, really. And what really shocks me is that a product like that can get on the shelf in the first place without any due diligence on the health impacts of such a product. We have stringent regulations governing food, for example, and yet these products were able to get onto the market, and I think it's the tobacco industry's way of getting nicotine back into people in as wide and extensive way as they possibly can, and also young people. And they started off saying it's under the guise of stopping people from smoking. I don't buy that at all, and I'm glad that we've banned the sale of vapes to under 18s, but I would go further. I think the colouring and all of that stuff of various sort of blends and sort of tasting and so on like that, all that has to stop. We're heading in that direction. I think we will obviously follow up in terms of more research and so forth, but it's the proliferation of vaping outlets, in my view, is not good for society. It's not good for young people. We did tremendous work on tobacco, and we don't need to, and I think another front is opened up, and we need to tackle that.